In this video, I'm going to teach you how to install the Terminal Services role in Windows Server 2008. In front of you, you see a Windows Server 2008 Enterprise desktop, and this is release candidate 0 build 6001. So by the time this comes to RTM, these interfaces might change, although I do doubt it. That being said, let's just move on forward. In order to install the TS role, we have a couple different steps. So let's just move right into those steps, shall we? Okay. So the first thing we want to do is this screen you see in front of you is a Windows Server 2008 desktop. I just booted into it, so I'm going to go ahead and click Start. Then I'm going to go to All Programs. Then I'm going to come up to Administrative Tools. Then I'm going to come down to this new feature, this applet called the Server Manager. It's actually not a new applet. It was actually in Windows Server 2003, but how many of you guys really used it? Raise your hands. I didn't. So, but within Windows Server 2008, it is a feature, it is an applet that we're going to do a lot of work in. In this applet, in the Server Manager applet, we have roles, we have features, we have diagnostics, configuration, storage, and you can configure all this information or all these settings for this particular Windows Server 2008 box within the Server Manager. But what we're interested in today is turning this server into a terminal server. So we're going to go ahead and click Roles. Then we're going to add roles because Terminal Services is now a role. We don't actually go into add or remove programs anymore into the system components and add it that way. We add it through a role. We come here into the Add Roles wizard. We click Next, and then we select the role that we want to add. In our case, Terminal Services. And as you can see, there's many other different roles. Active Directory, DHCP server, you name it, right? Application server, IIS, blah, 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 blah. So let's go ahead and click Next after we selected Terminal Services. Here's a handy little screen just basically giving me some information about what TS is. We all know that. So from here, it asks me what specific services do I want to install for the Terminal Services role. Do I want this to be a Terminal Services box, a TS licensing server, a TS session broker server, a TS gateway, or TS web access? I'm going to go ahead and click Terminal Services because we just want this box to be a Terminal Services box. I'm a huge fan of delegating servers for tasks, if at all possible. I do not like to load down my Terminal Services boxes with other type of tasks. It cuts into the amount of performance and the amount of users, ultimately the amount of users we can get on this particular box. So that being said, click Terminal Service, go ahead and click Next. Then it's going to give me a nice little warning screen that basically tells me that I should install all my applications after installing Terminal Services. Again, that's after. Fresh build, I just built this server, I just logged into this server, and now we're going to go ahead and install the TS service. From there, the next screen we see is a new feature with Windows Server 2008 Terminal Services, and that is whether or not we want to specify network level authentication. You guys might not be familiar with network level authentication, but if you've used the new RDP client 6.0 or above, then you probably have definitely seen it, but just might not know exactly what it is. Network level authentication is a new authentication method that completes user authentication before you establish a remote desktop connection and the login screen appears. This is definitely a more secure authentication method, and it also helps you protect the particular server from malicious attacks. So what I mean by this is as you're logging in with the Terminal Services client for the first time, it comes up with a new box asking you to log in prior to ever actually seeing the desktop Windows GINA and the Windows Control-Delete authentication box, right? What this does is allows you to log in from the client side, pass those credentials to the server, and then seamlessly sort of single sign on your way directly into the desktop. There are some advantages to network level authentication. Obviously, it's better security because you can stick a Terminal Services box out in front of it and people can't just try to brute force their way into the box. Or it also actually requires fewer computer resources initially for the Windows Server 2008 Terminal Services because we're not requiring the Gina to be there and for that process of login. So it's going to be a little bit quicker for the user, and it's going to be a little bit better for allowing the terminal services box to serve up applications via authenticate users, right? Do note if you require network level authentication today, it's only good for clients running, of course, Windows Server 2008 RCO or above, or Windows Vista. If you're running Windows XP, Macintosh, Linux, any type of other device, then there's no dice on this. So if we require it from here, then that means that those other boxes cannot log in as of today. So I'm going to do not require network authentication. Long explanation, but I hope that makes sense to everyone. The next screen is specify licensing mode. There's some new features within Terminal Services Licensing. Unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about the new Terminal Services Licensing mode and the new features in this particular video. I'll come back and give you a whole dedicated video on just Terminal Services Licensing. For this video, we're just going to go ahead and configure later. And now we want to come in and select the users and groups that we allow access to this particular terminal server. In the past, we had the remote desktop users group. We basically said, do we want to allow this desktop users group to have access or not? But we can never add users or groups to it. Now we can actually, during the installation of terminal services, say, I want to add my terminal services group to the remote desktop users group. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave administrators as the default, and I'm good to go. So that being said, now the next screen we come to is just a sort of a summary of the different configuration settings that we've configured during this wizard. So I'm going to go ahead and click or install, and then it's going to go ahead and install terminal services. So TS has installed, and now it brings us to a nice little screen say we need to restart this computer. So that has not changed in Server 2008. We still need to restart the computer. So go ahead and click close. It's going to ask me if I want to restart. I'm going to say yes. It's going to shut down my box, and it's going to go ahead and restart this thing. Once we're done in restarting the computer, then we're ready to install some application. Okay, I'm back, and we have rebooted. I've logged in, and as soon as I logged in, the server manager opened up, and you see it brought up a little dialog box that says resuming configuration. And what it's doing is actually finishing the process of installing and setting up this server for terminal services. So this will just take a couple seconds, and then once this is done, we'll be ready to install applications. As this is happening, though, I do want to talk to you again about installing applications. It is very important to install applications in what I call change user install mode. What this install mode does is actually monitors all the application installation, all the files being brought down to the being installed on the workstation, the registry entries, things like that, and puts them in the proper location. So that being said, it is extremely important to do that. If your application that you're installing starts with a setup.exe, then it automatically does put the system into install mode. But if you're installing from something like app install.exe, some funky name that's not setup.exe, it will not automatically do that. And then at that point, you need to come down to start, run, type cmd. If I can get that in there, type cmd, and then go ahead and click change user install. And then that'll go ahead and put the system into install mode, if I can type it correctly. I know you guys are all laughing at me now. There's two L's to install, aren't there? Okay, so change user / install. Now this system is ready to be installed. Once you're done, you want to come back and go change user execute, EXECUTE. As you can tell, I'm having a little bit of difficulties typing today, but that's okay. You get the gist. So once we're done with that, we're ready to go ahead and reboot the server or have users log on. But really what we're ready to do from there is start the process of installing and configuring that particular application to be published as a remote app, the new Terminal Services remote app. So let's go ahead and talk about that. But first, let's click close. See a nice little dialog box coming up informing me that I do not have terminal services licensing enabled yet. You have, I believe, 122 days, something of that nature, to install terminal services licensing before the server starts denying connections. That'll give me plenty of time with this build to create another video and teach you guys all about TS licensing, and we'll definitely do that in the coming weeks. So that being said, let's go ahead and close out of the Server Manager. And I'm going to close this. And let's go ahead and show you how to do Remote App. But first, I want to install some applications. I'm not going to bore you with the details of installing the app. Give me a few seconds here, and I'll meet you on the flip side. And then we'll go ahead and configure the Remote App. Sound good? Sounds good. Okay, I'm back. What you didn't see is that I just finished installing Microsoft Office 2007. So it's a good application, good suite of applications to install on a terminal services and, of course, configure for the Remote App feature. But I sort of lied. The next step we have is not going to be to add Remote App Programs, but we're actually going to verify the remote connection settings first. So what this means is, I'll explain in a second. So let's go ahead and open up the remote connection settings. And to do that, go ahead and click Start, then click Run, and then type Control System. What this is going to do is go ahead and open up the system properties that's found in Control Panel. You can also go into Control Panel and double-click the Systems icon, and you can be here in a second. But under the tasks over here, as you can see my mouse, we want to click the Remote Settings link. And this brings us to the Remote System Settings. This is where, as during installation of the TS role, we configured remote settings in that default desktop users group, and also about network level authentication and all that jazz, right? Remember that? So here we can change this after the fact if we so desired. What this does is click an option and then specify who can connect if needed, right? So we can configure things like don't allow connections to the server, allow connections from computers running any version of remote desktop. Remember I talked about that? That's not what network level authentication. Or we can allow computers only that are configured for remote desktop client running network level authentication. So we're going to keep it back on what we configured during setting up the role. We can also click select users, and what this does is allow us to add more users to that desktop users group, remember? So I'm going to go ahead and click cancel. I'm going to cancel out of this. And now I'm going to fulfill my promise, and we're going to configure the new feature, one of the new killer features of terminal services found in Windows Server 2008, and that is the ability to add remote apps. And what a remote app is basically an application that looks and feels and acts as though it's running locally on your local machine. If you're a Citrix customer, or if you're familiar with Citrix Metaframe or presentation server, then it's a lot like, almost identical in many ways to a Citrix published application. So how do we do this, right? First of all, we want to go ahead and click Start. Then we want to come up to our All Programs, then Administrative Tools. Then we're going to come down to a new folder that's been added since installing the TS role called Terminal Services. From there, we're going to come down and we're going to click this new applet called TS Remote App Manager. This is a pretty cool little Remote App Manager. Okay, so once we're in this new TS Remote App Manager, now we want to go ahead and add a Remote App Program. There's many different things we can do here, and I'll go through some of these once we add the Remote App. We come over here to Actions, click Add Remote App Program, and it brings us to a nice fancy little new wizard. Click Next. Then here's all the applications that are found in our Start programs for all users. Let's say you installed an application and it was installed for you only and not for the all users. You won't see it. But you can always come in and browse and go find a particular application, right? So, but we want to configure Office, right? So we're going to do Office Access 2007. We're going to do, I don't care about diagnostics. We want to do Excel. We want to do Outlook, we want to do PowerPoint, we want to do Publisher, we want to do Word, and that's it. Okay, so go ahead and click Next. We're going to add these 6 programs. Does that sound good? Yep. Click Finish. Now, wow, it just published those 6 applications. Really simple, right? Amazingly simple. But there's more to it. We can actually configure more settings. So if we come in here and right-click on one of these applications and go to Properties, we're going to come in here and we can configure. We can give it change the name of it. We can give it a command line argument. We can change the icon, the location, an alias, things of that nature. Okay, but we're happy with this. Oops, there's one more thing I did not show you, and that is this little checkbox here, and that's a checkbox to say this remote app program is available through the TS Web Access. I've not talked about the TS Web Access yet. TS Web Access is sort of the, if you're familiar with Citrix presentation, the Infuse or the web interface. It's the portal, it's the web page that a user can go to launch their particular remote app application. So we do want these to be available in there, but you might want to hide an app and not have it available in there, right? So that being said, now now we're ready to really build the TS Web Access portal, right? But before that, there's tons of different things you can do with the TS Remote App Manager and with a remote app. If we right-click, we can see other things. We can we can come in here and say show this or hide it in the TS Web Access. We can create an RDP file. What this allows us to do is to create an RDP file that I can distribute to a user and allow that user just to double click on that RDP file and launch into this remote app. Really easy, and then that could be deployed via numerous deployment mechanisms. Or I can create an Windows installer package, which is really cool too. You can create this installer package. It's basically an MSI file. Distribute that through your SMS, through any type of application that deploys through Active Directory, that deploys and installs MSI files. Or you can just put it up on a network share and say, hey, if you want this, double click it, right? Or send it to an email and say, double click this install and install this app. And what that'll do is actually put that application in the Start Programs group for that user to then in return launch it. So we're ready to basically go ahead and install the TS Web Access, right? I'm going to do that in another video though, and I hope you've learned something about what's new in terminal services on Windows Server 2008. And thank you so much, and definitely please visit www.dabcc.com for more information. Thanks everyone.